Behind the scenes of this 1993 action comedy spoof lurks a treasure trove of bizarre production secrets, celebrity family favors, and continuity mistakes that are wilder than anything in the actual movie. From supermodel casting controversies to fake critic quotes designed to fool Leonard Maltin, plus a sequel that was so confident it already had a poster printed before the first film bombed at the box office. Here are the 15 weird facts you didn't know about Loaded Weapon 1. Fact 1. Bruce Willis's family favor cameo. Bruce Willis's surprise appearance in Loaded Weapon 1 wasn't the result of casting directors or big studio negotiations, but rather a simple family favor that led to one of the movie's most memorable moments. The action star appeared in the film as his iconic die-hard character John McClane, complete with his signature dirty undershirt and exhausted demeanor, all because his brother David Willis happened to be one of the movie's producers. The cameo itself is perfectly timed comedic gold that plays on everything audiences knew about Bruce Willis's most famous role. In the scene, a helicopter fires a machine gun at a trailer, in a direct parody of the explosive action sequences from Lethal Weapon 2. After the trailer gets completely destroyed in a massive explosion, Bruce Willis casually walks out of the wreckage looking exactly like John McClane after surviving another impossible situation. True to his character, he immediately starts complaining about the destruction, delivering his lines with the same world-weary attitude that made McClane such a beloved action hero. What makes this cameo even more interesting is how it was specifically written to poke fun at Bruce Willis's real-life situation at the time. The joke centered around the fact that while John McClane was supposed to be a New York City police officer who lived in the Big Apple, Bruce Willis, the actor, actually worked primarily in Los Angeles for his film career. This inside joke about the geography of his career added an extra layer of humor for those who caught the reference. David Willis's role as producer gave him the perfect opportunity to bring his famous brother into the project, and Bruce Willis was apparently happy to help out with what amounted to probably just a day or two of filming. The cameo works so well because it doesn't feel forced or out of place, instead fitting naturally into the movie's overall strategy of parodying every major action film and star of the era. For fans of both die-hard and comedy spoofs, seeing John McClane stumble out of yet another explosion while complaining about his circumstances was exactly the kind of unexpected crossover moment that made 1993 audiences laugh out loud. Fact 2. The sequel that never was. The producers of Loaded Weapon 1 were so confident their comedy would be a hit that they actually had promotional posters printed for Loaded Weapon 2 before the first movie even reached theaters, complete with a cheeky tagline that acknowledged everyone would see the sequel coming from a mile away. The poster featured the words, "Oh come on, you knew it was coming," which perfectly captured the self-aware humor that defined the original film, and showed just how certain the studio was that audiences would demand another round of action movie parodies. This level of advanced planning wasn't unusual in Hollywood during the early 1990s, especially for comedy franchises that seemed like sure bets. Studios often lined up sequel deals and marketing materials based on projected success rather than actual box office results, banking on the popularity of spoof movies that had been dominating theaters since Airplane and the Naked Gun proved audiences loved seeing their favorite action films get the comedy treatment. The Loaded Weapon team had every reason to believe they were sitting on the next big parody franchise, given the endless supply of action movies that could be mocked and the proven track record of National Lampoon productions. Unfortunately for everyone involved, Loaded Weapon 1 failed to perform as expected when it hit theaters in February of 1993. While the movie did manage to open at number 1 at the domestic box office, it quickly fell off and ended up grossing only about $28 million in the United States and Canada, with an additional $23 million internationally. These numbers weren't terrible, but they weren't strong enough to justify the confidence that had led to pre-printed sequel posters and signed deals for follow-up films. The disappointing box office performance led New Line Cinema to cancel all plans for Loaded Weapon 2, leaving those promotional posters as nothing more than expensive reminders of Hollywood's eternal optimism. The tagline, "Oh, come on, you knew it was coming," ended up being accidentally prophetic in the worst possible way, since audiences apparently knew the sequel was coming and decided they didn't particularly want to see it happen. Fact 3. CHIP's officers finally drew guns. When Eric Estrada and Larry Wilcox made their cameo appearance in Loaded Weapon 1 as their famous CHIP's characters, Officer Francis Poncherello and Officer John Baker, they accomplished something that had never happened during the entire 6-year run of their original television series. They were finally shown with their weapons drawn and ready for action. This seemingly small detail represents a fascinating break from one of the most unusual aspects of CHIP's, which managed to be a police show where the main characters almost never used their firearms. Throughout the original CHIP's series, which ran from 1977 to 1983, Ponch and John were California Highway Patrol officers who spent their time chasing speeders, investigating traffic accidents, and dealing with various criminals on the highways around Los Angeles. Despite being law enforcement officers who regularly encountered dangerous situations, the show maintained a remarkably family-friendly tone by having the main characters rely on their motorcycles, physical skills, and quick thinking rather than drawing their guns to solve problems. This approach was quite deliberate, as the producers wanted to create a police show that parents could watch with their children without worrying about excessive violence or gunplay. The decision to have Estrada and Wilcox appear in Loaded Weapon 1 with guns drawn was clearly intended as a joke for fans who remembered the original series and its notably non-violent approach to police work. In the movie, the two officers show up in the middle of an intense gunfight with their weapons ready, representing exactly the kind of situation that their CHIP's characters would have found a way to resolve without resorting to firearms. The cameo works on multiple levels because it plays into the movie's overall theme of parodying action movie cliches, while also gently poking fun at how unrealistic it was for highway patrol officers to go their entire careers without ever needing to draw their gun. For viewers who grew up watching CHIP's reruns, seeing Ponch and John finally armed and ready for battle provided a moment of unexpected nostalgia mixed with the absurd humor that defined Loaded Weapon 1's approach to spoofing police and action movies. Fact 4. Leonard Maltin Rating Rejection. The DVD cover of Loaded Weapon 1 featured a collection of deliberately fake critic quotes that were designed to be as ridiculous as possible. But one of these joke reviews almost included the name of a real film critic who wanted absolutely nothing to do with the parody. The marketing team had planned to include a fake quote attributed to Leonard Maltin featuring his signature 2.5-star rating, which was widely recognized by movie fans as the most frequently used rating in Maltin's famous movie guidebooks. But Maltin himself refused to give permission for his name to be used in connection with the spoof. Leonard Maltin was one of the most respected and well-known film critics of the 1980s and 90s, publishing annual movie guides that became essential reference books for film lovers who wanted quick ratings and capsule reviews of thousands of movies. His rating system used a scale from 1 to 4 stars, with half-star increments, and movie fans noticed that he seemed to give out 2.5-star ratings more often than any other score. This rating basically meant a movie was watchable but not particularly special, which made it perfect material for the kind of self-deprecating humor that Loaded Weapon 1 was trying to achieve with its fake critic quotes. The other fake quotes that did make it onto the DVD cover were intentionally absurd and clearly not meant to be taken seriously, featuring critics with names like Important Critic, Really Important Critic, and Really Important Critic, offering praise like On a Scale of 1 to 10, and Shorter Than Dances with Wolves, and the movie's even funnier than the video cover. These quotes were obviously jokes that played into the movie's overall strategy of making fun of Hollywood marketing tactics and the way studios cherry-pick positive reviews for their promotional materials. When Maltin declined to let them use his name, the marketing team simply left that particular fake quote off the cover. But the incident shows how even parody movies had to deal with the legal complexities of using real people's names and reputations in their promotional materials, even when the intention was clearly humorous rather than malicious. Fact 5. Mr. Potato Head Criminal Brick Joke. One of the most cleverly executed running gags in Loaded Weapon 1 involves a police sketch artist who creates what appears to be a completely incompetent composite drawing that turns out to be surprisingly accurate in the most absurd way possible. Early in the film, a witness is describing a criminal suspect to a police sketch artist, and when the camera reveals the finished drawing, it shows a perfect illustration of Mr. Potato Head, complete with the detachable facial features and potato-shaped body that made the toy famous. At first glance, this seems like just another throwaway sight gag making fun of how terrible police sketches can sometimes be when witnesses give vague or confusing descriptions. The genius of this particular joke lies in how the filmmakers followed through on the setup much later in the movie, creating what comedy writers call a brick joke, where the punchline comes so long after the setup that audiences might have forgotten about the original gag. Several scenes after the sketch artist's drawing is revealed, viewers can spot two police officers in the background of a scene actually arresting someone who looks exactly like the Mr. Potato Head drawing. The suspect being handcuffed is clearly the actual Mr. Potato Head toy, and as the officers lead him away, the toy can be heard protesting his innocence by shouting, "Don't fry me," which adds an extra layer of wordplay since potato heads are typically associated with being fried or baked. This type of visual comedy requires careful planning and attention to detail, because the payoff depends entirely on viewers remembering the earlier setup and making the connection between the two scenes. The joke works on multiple levels because it simultaneously makes fun of unreliable police sketches, the absurdity of toy characters being treated as real criminals, and the general tendency of comedy movies to include random sight gags that seem unconnected to the main plot. The Mr. Potato Head gag also demonstrates the movie's commitment to filling every scene with background details and visual jokes that reward viewers who pay close attention to what's happening around the edges of the main action. Fact 6. Kathy Ireland's dual role switch. The character of Destiny Demeanor in Loaded Weapon 1 represents one of the most unusual casting decisions in comedy movie history, as the role was actually split between two completely different actresses who appear in the same scenes to create a deliberate visual transformation joke. The character begins as a stereotypical nerdy secretary played by actress Alice Beasley, who is known for her role as the quirky receptionist Agnes DePesto on the television series Moonlighting, but then literally transforms into supermodel Kathy Ireland when she removes her glasses and lets her hair down in a parody of the classic movie makeover scene. This casting choice was designed to take the familiar Hollywood trope of the plain girl who becomes beautiful after a simple wardrobe change and push it to its most ridiculous extreme by actually using two different people to represent the before and after versions of the same character. Alice Beasley portrayed the dowdy, unattractive version of Destiny with all the typical visual markers of the Hollywood ugly duckling: thick glasses, unflattering hairstyle, and frumpy clothing that hid her figure. The transformation scene plays out exactly like audiences would expect from countless romantic comedies, with the character reaching up to remove her glasses and shake out her hair. However, instead of revealing that Alice Beasley was beautiful all along, the movie cuts to Kathy Ireland, who was one of the most famous supermodels in the world at the time, and had recently begun transitioning into acting roles. Ireland takes over the character completely from that point forward, playing Destiny as a glamorous and seductive woman who serves as both a parody of the femme fatale characters from movies like Basic Instinct and a commentary on Hollywood's unrealistic beauty standards. The joke works because it acknowledges how absurd these transformation scenes really are in regular movies, where actresses who are already attractive pretend to be plain until they remove a pair of glasses. By using an actual supermodel to represent the transformed version, Loaded Weapon 1 takes the concept to its logical conclusion and creates a visual gag that's impossible to miss, while simultaneously giving Kathy Ireland a showcase for her comedic timing and acting abilities. Fact 7. Gun names versus wrong guns. The main characters in Loaded Weapon 1 have names that were specifically chosen to reference two of the most famous firearms in history, but in a perfect example of the movie's attention to detail when it comes to referencing other films, they actually carry completely different weapons that match exactly what their counterparts used in the original Lethal Weapon movies. Jack Colt takes his surname from the Colt Firearms Company, which produced legendary revolvers like the Colt Single Action Army that became synonymous with the American Old West, while West Luger is named after the German Luger pistol that was widely used during both World Wars and became one of the most recognizable handguns in military history. However, throughout the entire movie, Jack Colt carries a Beretta 92 FS pistol instead of any type of Colt firearm, and West Luger uses a Smith & Wesson revolver rather than the German Luger pistol that inspired his character's name. This apparent inconsistency was actually a deliberate choice by the filmmakers to maintain their parody's connection to the Lethal Weapon series, since these were the exact same weapons carried by Martin Riggs and Roger Murtaugh in the original films that Loaded Weapon 1 was spoofing. The decision to prioritize movie accuracy over name accuracy shows how seriously the production took its role as a parody, ensuring that even small details like weapon choices would be immediately recognizable to fans of the Lethal Weapon franchise. The Beretta pistol had become closely associated with Mel Gibson's character Martin Riggs, appearing in multiple action sequences and becoming part of his character's signature look, while Danny Glover's Roger Murtaugh was known for carrying the Smith & Wesson revolver that represented his more traditional, by-the-book approach to police work. Gun enthusiasts and movie fans who paid close attention to these details would have immediately understood the reference, even though it created the amusing contradiction of characters named after specific firearms carrying completely different weapons. This kind of layered joke demonstrates how Loaded Weapon 1 operated on multiple levels, with some gags designed for general audiences and others specifically crafted for viewers who were deeply familiar with the action movies being parodied. Fact 8. TMNT stock footage cameo. One of the most unexpected cameos in Loaded Weapon 1 comes from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, who appear in a brief scene that was made possible by a fortunate coincidence in movie studio ownership rather than any elaborate crossover planning. The scene occurs when Jack Colt is crawling through the sewers trying to reach the villain's warehouse and needs to find the right manhole cover to make his entrance. But instead of emerging where he intended, he accidentally pops up in the middle of the turtles' underground lair while they're playing a game of Trivial Pursuit. What makes this cameo particularly interesting is that the filmmakers didn't hire actors in turtle costumes or create new footage specifically for Loaded Weapon 1, but instead used actual scenes that had been filmed for the 1990 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie. This approach saved the production both time and money, while creating a seamless crossover moment that felt natural within the context of the parody's anything-goes attitude toward pop culture references and random celebrity appearances. The reason this stock footage approach was possible comes down to the business side of movie making. Since both Loaded Weapon 1 and the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles film were distributed by New Line Cinema, having the same studio handle both movies meant that the legal rights and permissions needed to use existing Turtles footage were much easier to obtain than they would have been if the characters belonged to a competing studio. New Line Cinema had invested heavily in the Ninja Turtles franchise and was always looking for ways to cross-promote their properties, so including the popular characters in their new comedy was a win-win situation that gave Loaded Weapon 1 an extra dose of recognition while reminding audiences about their successful Turtles movies. The Trivial Pursuit game detail adds another layer of humor to the scene, since it shows the supposedly action-ready ninja warriors engaged in the most mundane possible activity during their downtime. The juxtaposition of Colt's serious mission with the Turtles' casual board game perfectly captures the kind of unexpected comedy that made Loaded Weapon 1 memorable for audiences who appreciated its willingness to throw in random pop culture references whenever the opportunity presented itself. Fact 9. Magnetic Police Light continuity error. One of the most visible production mistakes in Loaded Weapon 1 occurs during the final scene when Jack Colt and Wes Luger are getting into their police car to drive away, and a simple prop malfunction creates an unintentionally comedic moment that somehow made it past all the editors and into the finished movie. The car they're using has a magnetic police light mounted on the right rear section of the roof, which was a common type of emergency light used by unmarked police vehicles that could be quickly attached or removed as needed, but the magnetic connection wasn't strong enough to withstand the minor jostling that occurred during filming. As Colt opens the passenger door to get into the car, the door catches on the wire that connects the magnetic light to the vehicle's electrical system, causing the entire light assembly to shift sideways and begin sliding across the roof of the car. The movement is clearly visible to anyone watching the scene, and the light continues to move throughout the shot as the wire gets pulled and tugged by Colt's actions. What makes this mistake particularly noticeable is that the magnetic light starts out positioned properly in its intended location, but ends up sitting at an obviously wrong angle by the time the scene concludes. This type of continuity error is exactly the kind of small production detail that filmmakers usually catch during the editing process, since maintaining consistency between shots is one of the basic requirements of professional movie making. Most productions would have either reshot the scene to fix the problem or used digital effects to correct the light's position in post-production, but Loaded Weapon 1 apparently either didn't notice the mistake or decided it wasn't worth the time and expense to fix. The fact that this error made it into the final cut is particularly ironic, given that Loaded Weapon 1 was specifically designed to make fun of the technical and logical mistakes that often appear in big-budget action movies. The sliding police light serves as an unintentional example of the very type of production oversight that the movie was parodying, creating a meta-level joke that works whether the filmmakers intended it or not, since audiences can laugh at both the mistake itself and the irony of finding such an obvious error in a movie about movie mistakes. Fact 10. TV version name Mix-Up. A deleted scene that only appeared in certain television broadcasts of Loaded Weapon 1 featured one of the most bizarre meta-comedy moments in the entire movie, where Jack Colt accidentally breaks character by saying the wrong name and then acknowledges his mistake in a way that completely shatters the fourth wall. The scene takes place during the climactic shootout with Mr. Jigsaw, when Colt gets hit by gunfire and falls to the ground, appearing to be seriously wounded or possibly dead, which would have been a dramatic moment in any normal action movie but becomes something completely different in this extended version. Instead of staying in character as the tough cop Jack Colt, Emilio Estevez delivers a line where he says, "It'll take more than 40 rounds from an Uzi to kill Ted Zippelman," using a completely made-up name that has nothing to do with his character or anyone else in the movie. The moment becomes even more surreal when Wes Luger points out the obvious mistake by responding, "But your name's Colt," which forces the wounded character to confront the fact that he just said something that makes no sense within the context of the story they're supposed to be telling. Rather than trying to cover up the error or pretend it didn't happen, Colt looks directly at the camera and yells in frustration, acknowledging both his mistake and the presence of the audience in a way that completely breaks the illusion that this is a real story about real characters. After this moment of pure absurdity, the scene continues exactly as it does in the regular theatrical release, with Colt getting up and rejoining the action, as if nothing unusual had happened. This type of self-aware comedy was relatively rare in mainstream movies of the early 1990s, making the deleted scene particularly interesting as an example of how far the filmmakers were willing to push their parody beyond simple jokes about action movie cliches. The fact that this scene was cut from the theatrical release but preserved for television broadcasts suggests that different versions of the movie were edited for different audiences, with the TV version including more experimental comedy that might have been considered too weird for general theater audiences. Fact 11. Wheel of Fortune time limit. The television version of Loaded Weapon 1 included an extended scene that took the movie's parody of police procedural cliches to an absolutely ridiculous extreme by having Captain Doyle determine how much time Luger has to solve the case using a literal game show wheel instead of making an arbitrary decision like most movie police captains do. The scene takes place in Captain Doyle's office, when he's giving Luger the standard ultimatum that appears in virtually every buddy cop movie, where the gruff superior officer tells the detective he has a limited amount of time to crack the case before getting pulled off the assignment or facing serious consequences for his failure to produce results. Instead of simply announcing that Luger has 48 hours or some other dramatically appropriate deadline, Captain Doyle brings out a large wheel that looks exactly like the spinning wheel used on game shows, like Wheel of Fortune, complete with different time limits and movie references written in each section. The wheel includes options like 76 trombones, which references the famous song from the musical The Music Man, 9.5 weeks, which was the title of a popular romantic drama from 1986, High Noon, referring to the classic Western movie starring Gary Cooper, and 7 Days in May, which was a political thriller from 1964 about a military coup attempt. Luger spins the wheel, while Captain Doyle and everyone else in the office watches to see where it will land, creating a moment of suspense that parodies both game shows and the artificial tension that police movies create around arbitrary deadlines. The wheel spins past several options before finally stopping on 48 hours, which was not only a reasonable amount of time for solving a case, but also the title of a popular buddy cop movie starring Eddie Murphy and Nick Nolte that had been released in 1982 and spawned a sequel in 1990. This particular joke works on multiple levels because it makes fun of how arbitrary these police deadlines always seem in movies, while also referencing several other films and musicals that audiences might recognize, creating a layered comedy moment that rewards viewers who catch all the different references packed into a single spinning wheel. Fact 12. Director's Police Academy connection. Gene Quintano came to Loaded Weapon 1 with extensive experience in police comedy after writing the screenplays for Police Academy 3, back in training in Police Academy 4, Citizens on Patrol, which gave him a deep understanding of how to balance slapstick humor with law enforcement settings in ways that would appeal to mainstream audiences. The Police Academy franchise had become one of the most successful comedy series of the 1980s, proving that audiences had an enormous appetite for movies that made fun of police work, training procedures, and the various personality types that might be attracted to careers in law enforcement. Quintano's work on Police Academy 3, which was released in 1986, and Police Academy 4, which came out in 1987, had taught him how to create comedy that relied heavily on physical gags, character-based humor, and the kind of over-the-top situations that could only happen in movie versions of police departments. These films were known for their reliance on sight gags, pratfalls, and absurd scenarios where incompetent recruits somehow managed to save the day, despite causing chaos wherever they went, which provided excellent training for someone who would later need to parody the entire buddy cop and action movie genres. The experience of writing for the Police Academy series also gave Quintano insight into how audiences responded to different types of comedy within police settings, since those movies had to walk a careful line between making fun of law enforcement while still maintaining enough respect for the profession to avoid alienating viewers. This background proved invaluable when he moved on to directing and co-writing Loaded Weapon 1, since parody movies require an even more delicate balance between comedy and the source material being spoofed. The Police Academy connection also helps explain why Loaded Weapon 1 feels so confident in its approach to police comedy, with Quintano drawing on years of experience in creating scenarios where law enforcement officers could be both competent heroes and sources of comedic chaos. His familiarity with the rhythms and conventions of police comedies allowed him to subvert audience expectations while still delivering the kind of physical comedy and character interactions that had proven successful in his previous work. Fact 13. Memorial Dedication Mystery. The closing credits of Loaded Weapon 1 include a dedication that reads, "This film is dedicated to the memory of John S. Owens." But despite the prominence of this tribute appearing at the end of a major studio release, very little information is publicly available about who John Owens was, or what his specific connection to the production might have been. What is known is that Owens worked as a boom operator in the sound department of the film industry, which means he was responsible for positioning microphones during filming to capture dialogue and other audio elements that would be used in the final movie soundtrack. Boom operators play a crucial role in movie production because they must work closely with both the director and the sound recording team to ensure that actors' voices are captured clearly without the microphone equipment appearing in the camera frame. This job requires considerable skill and experience, since boom operators need to anticipate how actors will move during each scene and position their equipment accordingly while staying completely out of sight of the cameras. The work is physically demanding and requires someone who can maintain steady hands and precise timing throughout long shooting days. The fact that the filmmakers chose to dedicate their movie to John Owens suggests that he had a meaningful impact on the people he worked with during his career in the sound department, though the specific circumstances that led to this tribute remain unclear from publicly available sources. Movie dedications are typically reserved for people who had significant personal or professional relationships with the cast and crew, so it's likely that Owens worked on Loaded Weapon 1 or other projects with members of the production team. The mystery surrounding this dedication reflects how many behind-the-scenes film industry workers remain largely unknown to the general public, despite making essential contributions to the movies that audiences enjoy. Boom operators and other technical crew members rarely receive recognition outside of the credits, making this dedication particularly notable as a way for the filmmakers to honor someone whose work might otherwise go unnoticed by viewers who focus primarily on the actors and directors when watching the finished product. Fact 14. James Doohan's Scotty spoof. James Doohan's cameo appearance in Loaded Weapon 1 as Officer Scotty represents one of the most clever casting choices in the entire movie, as it allowed the beloved Star Trek actor to essentially play the same character he had portrayed for decades while transplanting Montgomery Scott's engineering expertise and Scottish accent into a completely different fictional universe. Doohan had spent years playing the chief engineer of the Starship Enterprise, becoming famous for his ability to solve impossible technical problems under pressure, while delivering memorable lines in his distinctive Scottish brogue that became iconic to science fiction fans around the world. The genius of casting Doohan as a police officer named Scotty lies in how naturally his established character traits translate from the 23rd century setting of Star Trek to the contemporary police work environment of Loaded Weapon 1. Throughout the original Star Trek series and the subsequent movies, Scotty was known as the miracle worker, who could fix any mechanical problem and get the Enterprise's engines running no matter how desperate the situation became, often while muttering about the impossibility of what Captain Kirk was asking him to accomplish in such a short amount of time. In his Loaded Weapon 1 appearance, Doohan essentially continues playing the same character but applies his technical expertise to police equipment rather than starship engines, creating a seamless crossover that works both as a Star Trek reference for science fiction fans and as a standalone comedy moment for viewers who might not catch the connection. The character maintains Scotty's trademark problem-solving abilities and Scottish accent, while adapting to the new context of law enforcement work, creating a performance that feels completely natural despite the dramatic change in setting. This type of character continuity across different projects was relatively unusual in the early 1990s, making Doohan's appearance particularly memorable for audiences who appreciated seeing a beloved science fiction character successfully transplanted into a completely different genre. The cameo also demonstrates how Loaded Weapon 1 was able to attract established actors who were willing to play variations of their most famous roles, while contributing to the movie's overall strategy of including as many recognizable faces as possible in unexpected contexts. Fact 15. Convenience store microwave timing. The opening action sequence of Loaded Weapon 1 demonstrates the filmmaker's attention to detail through a perfectly timed visual gag that uses a convenience store microwave as both a setup and punchline for the entire shootout scene that introduces Jack Colt's character to audiences. When Colt first enters the store, He casually places a sandwich into the microwave and starts the cooking cycle before becoming involved in the dramatic gunfight with armed robbers, creating a mundane domestic action that contrasts sharply with the explosive violence that's about to unfold around him. The genius of this particular joke lies in how the filmmakers choreographed the entire action sequence around the microwave's cooking timer, ensuring that the chaotic shootout would last exactly as long as it takes for a sandwich to heat up in a typical convenience store microwave. Throughout the gunfight, viewers can hear various action movie sound effects like gunshots, explosions, and breaking glass. But the microwave continues running in the background, maintaining its steady mechanical hum while Colt exchanges fire with the criminals and delivers parody versions of famous tough guy dialogue from movies like Dirty Harry. The payoff comes at the end of the shootout when the microwave timer reaches 0 and produces its characteristic dinging sound, which serves as an audio cue that the action sequence has officially concluded. When Colt opens the microwave to retrieve his sandwich, he discovers that all the gunfire and explosions have somehow ruined his meal, leaving him with a smoking, inedible mess that represents the collateral damage from his heroic intervention in the robbery attempt. True to his character's tendency to blame external factors for his problems, Colt responds to the ruined sandwich by complaining about the microwave's performance, rather than acknowledging that his decision to engage in a shootout might have contributed to the food preparation disaster. This reaction perfectly captures the kind of misplaced priorities and oblivious behavior that action movie heroes often display, where they focus on minor inconveniences while ignoring the major destruction happening around them. The entire sequence works as both a standalone comedy moment and a subtle commentary on how action movies treat violence as routine background activity that doesn't really affect the characters' daily lives.